We're here this afternoon speaking with Mark Curtis. He's a candidate for Muskegon County Prosecutor. Mark, give us a little bit about your background and what propelled you to run for Muskegon County Prosecutor.
Grew up in Lansing till we moved to Bay City. Graduated from John Glenn in Bay City, and then joined the Army for 5 years. Because the issue is I wanted to either be a law enforcement officer or a prosecuting attorney. But to be a law enforcement officer, you had to be 21 years old, and I wasn't 21. Knew that I didn't have really the discipline to go to college, would probably be wasting some money, so I wanted to go in the Army. My uncle actually was in the Army at the time, my aunt was in the Army at the time, so it seemed like the right thing to do. Went in, became a military police officer, deployed to Iraq and Panama, became a canine officer for 3 years of that, and then decided after 5 years you have to decide. You're either going to stay in for 20 or you're going to get out. And I decided to get out and pursue my education, which I did at Michigan State. Worked part-time as a loss prevention officer for JCPenney's doing that because it was a good job because they give you full benefits at 25 hours and they were open, not 9 to 5, but you could work after school. Still with the intention of then becoming a prosecuting attorney. Then went to school at Cooley and then graduated from there. When I was at Cooley, I worked for Frank Kelly, the ex-attorney general. Actually, I had an offer to work in the AG's office and an offer to work for him, and I actually asked something you don't ever ask an employer, who should I go work for? And he told me to come work for him. He said, because I'm going to teach you how to be a lawyer and not how to push papers. And we spent a lot of time talking, a lot of time in the car, driving back and forth, because that was one of my jobs, was to drive him down to Detroit and back for his speaking engagements. And eventually went applying for jobs and interviewed all over, but ended up here in Muskegon County. Got married in 2001, brought my wife with me when we came up here, and fell in love with it. My wife now teaches at Muskegon Public Schools. We have a 6-year-old daughter who's in Fruitport Public Schools and a 2-year-old that will be going to Fruitport too. And just liked it. Grew up to like to know the community. I like the work, I like the job, but at some point the politics aspect of it started to outweigh what I liked. But the one thing was I was passionate that I could go to work, I could do my job, and still separate myself from the politics aspect of it. I could still represent people, I could still work within their constraints, but I'm one of those people that believes that you change things from within. You just don't walk away from it and expect that it's going to change. I mean, that's not what's going to happen. I had actually decided a while ago that I was going to run. But I talked to my wife and we decided that now wasn't the right time to do it because I was 1 year away from vesting in my pension. I'd been there almost 10 years. Our plan was that we were going to leave after I had vested and then make this run. So I think that caused a little bit of a issue. We had discussed it with some people, and we're kind of thinking about what we were going to do. And then I got terminated, 32 days short of vesting in my pension. I had 6 weeks vacation. There was no reconciling that. They wouldn't work with me on that program. So I decided I was going to run, and I was getting ready to, had the group ready, had everybody ready, because I think that it was time Muskegon needs a change of what's happening. It wasn't right. What I had seen happening with victims and defendants, and what we were doing was taking our 17, 18-year-old kids and making them repeat offenders. We weren't addressing the problems. We were only arresting, being tough on crime, repeating, put them back out there, and then they were probation's problem. But, you know, when my daughter was born, I started thinking, is this the area that I want my daughter to grow up in? You know, I started to worry, like dads do. What happens that day that she's out driving down the street and something happens? Or, you know, I'd start seeing girls that were walking the street that shouldn't be out there because they're addicted to crack, and why are they out there? And all we would do is address the problem that they were doing crack. We weren't addressing the problem of why they were doing it. I thought a drug court needed to come to Muskegon. I know it's been explored. Nothing has ever been done about it, but they have a 90% success rate in the state of Michigan, that anybody who completes the program and graduates doesn't reoffend for 12 months. 90% of those people. And that's something Muskegon needs. I mean, we can keep arresting, incarcerating, and repeating, but until we do something to address the problem, all we're doing is making habitual offenders and making felons I mean, kids do stuff wrong. They need to answer for what they did, but if they're willing to stand up and admit what they did and make right with it, then why should we hit them with a felony that they're going to have until they're 40, 41 years old? Because they made one mistake. And that was the issue I was having, and that was the issue that drove me to do what I'm doing now.
There's 3 candidates for prosecuting attorney, and all 3 of you have been in the prosecutor's office and spent quite a bit of time there. Contrast your style and beliefs with your 2 opponents.
Mr. Corwin's I can't speak to because he wasn't in the office when I was there. He hasn't been in the office for a while. Mr. Hilson's style and mine, I'm a little bit more passionate, a little bit more community oriented. I don't believe that we just go to meetings every once in a while and become community oriented. When I was the community prosecutor for Muskegon and Muskegon Heights, the one thing is if you're going to be a community person, you need to know the community. And if all you do is sit upstairs and read police reports and go to a neighborhood association meeting, and I'm not taking away from the neighborhood association meetings, but if you don't actually get out and walk the streets and talk to the people that are living there, then you don't get to know the entire community. So I started riding around with Muskegon police officers. I then rode around with Muskegon Heights police officers once I got moved there. And you get to see the community the way that it is. Not the way that it appears in a police report or not the way that it appears in the news, but you get to see that there are good people that are living in those houses and not just the bad side of it. And that made me realize that there need to be a more aggressive approach as far as community prosecutors. That some jurisdictions actually put prosecutors out in the community and get them out of the office, and that's what needs to happen, because you can sit down here in that building all day long, but if you don't actually get out and go drive around in Muskegon Heights, or actually go out and sit on a porch and talk to somebody, then you don't know the problems that they're really facing. And that's what needs to happen. I mean, my prosecutors are going to go out and they're going to have office hours in those communities. There's going to be prosecutors assigned to communities. So instead of having to come down to the county building every time to talk about something and hope you find somebody, you're going to know that on this day, at this time, there's going to be a prosecutor and either a church member or a law enforcement officer that you're going to be able to go talk to and work on it. Mr. Hilson relies heavily on his trial stats. He relies heavily on his conviction rate, which is fine. I mean, it's great to have a conviction rate. It's great to have that. But the problem is that office is more about than going in and trying cases. It's about everything that leads up to it. Is that the prosecution walking into the courtroom is the final, it's the tip. It's the tip of the iceberg compared to everything else that happens. I mean, you don't see everything else that leads up to that point except when you walk into court. And you have to be knowledgeable in how to do that and willing to work with law enforcement to do that. He's in his own statement that he put in the paper. He felt that we've had a quarter century of great success under the current prosecutor. If you consider status quo success, then yes, we have. I don't. I think it's time that we actually start moving this community a little bit forward.
Several decades ago, the prosecutor's office had a office staff person. He was an attorney, and what he would do was meet with citizens who were having a potential problem, or not only a potential criminal problem, but a definite criminal problem with an individual. And what this staff person would do was send that individual that was the perceived problem a letter asking them to come into the office and talk about the problem in hopes of getting it resolved before it turned into a full-fledged criminal problem. Would you go ahead and reinstitute that program?
I don't know if I'd reinstitute it to the part where you're bringing them down to the prosecutor's office with a letter. I think that, again, takes away from, you have to come down and take it seriously. I found that when I was working in the community, is if I had somebody come up and say, hey, I'm having a problem with my neighbor, that me showing up in a patrol car with a police officer and walking up in a non-confrontational way, explaining who I am with an officer saying, yeah, this is who he is, and actually working it out works great. Is that it's not that notion of we're this big bad office that you have to come and answer to us or you're going to be in trouble. But I still had the ability to go out, talk to him, see the problem for myself, and say, hey, let's knock it off. Because the next time you don't knock it off and there's an issue and the police have to come, well, then I'm going to have to deal with it. And let's just be done with that. I mean, we still have programs like that need to happen. I mean, you get some senior citizens that get caught and they're stealing batteries or something like that. We send them a letter that says, don't get caught again. Those programs are helpful. We have a diversion program. They have a diversion program. It was instituted when I was still there. That's helpful. But I think once you get into that situation, it's not, everybody doesn't have to come down to the prosecutor's office. That's what I want to get away from, is everybody thinks that you have to go downtown to the prosecutor's office. You don't have to. You're going to know that on this date at this time, unless something huge has happened, that there's going to be a prosecutor sitting there that you're going to be able to go and talk about those problems with and deal with it in that point.
I'm going to classify felonies. In fact, I can classify misdemeanors into this too. 3 categories, but it's probably going to apply more to felonies. A violent felony with a victim, a non-violent felony with a victim, and a non-violent crime, misdemeanor and felony without a victim. Should the last category that I've described have equal precedence with the first 2?
Your victims are always going to be one of your top priorities. If there's been a violent felony and the victim of that, then he or she needs to be listened to, and they need to feel that they're being treated fairly. Anytime there's a victim. I myself haven't personally been a victim of a crime, but I know people that have, and it becomes the center of your world. And it might not be the center of the prosecutor's world, but it is to that victim. And if that victim doesn't seem that they're being listened to, then the system's failing them. And that's not the way it should be. I believe you should sit down and talk to everybody about everything. And if a victim doesn't feel they're being treated right, well, then let's talk about it and figure out how we can fix it. But you have to work within the confines of the law. I mean, there's some issues. I mean, sometimes you have to sit down and explain to them, hey, look, we might lose this case, but we're willing to go to trial. But I want the victim fully aware of what might happen. We're not going to try to negotiate away. Now, with the nonviolent ones, do I think it's high priority as the other ones? There's no victim, so you don't have anybody banging on the door. But that doesn't mean that the broken window of the abandoned house doesn't bother the person that's living next to it. Just because there's a person doing crack in the abandoned house and there's no victim doesn't mean it doesn't bother the person who's living behind it, who has 2 kids, who's trying to raise them in a good environment. I mean, it's hard to say that there's a victimless crime, because some way you're going to be able to connect it. But I think that that's where the drug courts and the specialty courts come into play, is that even if it's a victimless crime, a retail fraud or a malicious destruction of a building or something of that nature, there's a reason why they're committing that crime. And if there's a kid that throws a rock through a window, well, we might not be able to fix the window on the abandoned house, but you're going to pick up the trash around it. I mean, take some investment in your community. Because the next time somebody throws some trash down after you just got done spending 2 hours picking it all up, you might not be too happy with the person that threw it down. Give them a little bit of ownership in their property.
Now, you're well familiar with the fact that if every criminal case actually went to trial, then the prosecutor's office would probably have to quadruple their staff.
Oh, we'd never get anything done.
So plea bargaining, like it or not, is a fact of life. When you take a look at a case called People versus Cobbs, where the prosecutor and defense counsel come together with the judge and say, okay, look, we're going to advise this person that if he pleads guilty or no contest to the charges, that his sentence will be capped. A, do you think that's effective? And B, do you think it can be made more effective in using it more towards non-violent, non-victim crimes rather than your capital felonies?
Well, Cobbs are effective for one reason, is that everybody wants to know what's going to happen to them. If a defendant's going to go out and plead and says, well, we don't know what's going to happen. Well, I'm not pleading if I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, at Cobbs, as the judge will say, is that if you plead, this is what your sentence will be. And that gives the defendant some certainty, it gives the victim some certainty, and everybody gets a chance to go in and argue, or the prosecutor and defense attorney get to go in and talk to the judge and say, hey, this is what we think. You should either be towards the top of the guidelines or bottom of the guidelines, or be in the middle of the guidelines. And the judge makes his own decision of what he wants to do. I mean, he doesn't lose that discretion. And the one thing that's good for the defendants is that even if the judge says, I'll put you in prison for 15 years, your maximum minimum will be 15 years, which means I won't exceed 15 years at your sentence. Doesn't mean the judge can't come down from that. So you have an opportunity still as a defendant. It's not locked into stone. You can still come in and argue that you should come below that number, which is fine. He can come below that number. Now, if the judge finds some circumstances that says, hey, I can't stick with the agreement, I think that you need a harsher sentence than what you have, Well, then the judge gives the defendant the opportunity to withdraw his plea. So he's not bound by that guilty plea or that no contest plea that he already entered. But those are effective because it's an end certain. But there's another way you can do that too. I mean, if a prosecuting attorney and a defense attorney agree, you can go on the record and say, Judge, the prosecutor and the defense have agreed that if he pleads guilty, his sentence will be 15 years. Now the judge can say that's fine, and I'll accept that, but after he reads a pre-sentence report or finds something out about it, says I'm not going to agree to that 15 years, well then the defendant still has the opportunity to withdraw his plea. I think it helps move a lot of cases along, whether it's a capital offense or whether it's a, malicious destruction of a building over $1,000, because everybody wants to know what their sentence is going to be. And that's what helps. And some courts use it and some courts don't. And I think it helps move our docket along when the judges do that.
The public defender system in Muskegon County is presently under fire due to the fact that there's a case entitled Manny's versus Muskegon County, Genesee County, Calhoun County. And it's not just the Manny's is the plaintiff from Muskegon County, and there's some other defendants in there, or plaintiffs rather, from other counties that were at the time criminal defendants when the case was instituted. Does that indicate to you that the public defender system in Muskegon County is broken and needs some repair?
At one point in time, I'd say it was broken, but they've made steps to fix it. They now have, the courts have taken more control over the public defender system. It's not, we pay one law firm a lump sum of money and then they hire everybody out. It's now taken it, like in district court, the attorneys down there are younger attorneys. They're not, when I started, I love the guys that are down there, but some of them were, 60, 65, 70 years old. And it was more of a, let's just get through stuff. But now you have attorneys down there that are actually looking at cases, meeting with their clients, actually bringing up defenses and doing what they need to. But the judges have control over who's in the court. And if they feel that that person isn't doing a good enough job or representing the people well, then they can address that with that attorney. The same with circuit court. They now have separate contracts for each attorney that's up there. Those public defenders do the best that they can with what they have. But we also have to remember that they're contract employees who get paid a certain lump sum of money but still have to have a private practice on top of that, and they're retained attorneys. And that's the way that the system works in Muskegon County. But the caliber of attorneys has increased significantly over the past, I'd say, 10 years since I was there. And I think they do what they can with what they have. There's still some that are, we're going to tell you to do the best thing you can and do whatever, but as a public defender, I'd really hate to hear every time I go and talk to a client and to give them some advice that they're going to go get a real attorney, because they are real attorneys and they've been doing this a long time and they know what's going to happen. And if they want, they can petition to the court. I mean, it happened in a few cases. If they want an expert to go look at something or they want somebody to go look at something, then they can ask the court for permission to get the funds to do that. I mean, that's in their ability to do.
Is the jail overcrowded?
Yes.
What would be your method to go ahead and alleviate that?
We need to stop ignoring the problem. I'm going to come right back to drug court. We have a lot of people that what we do is we arrest them, we convict them, we put them in jail, and they serve their sentence. If you alleviate the reason that they're coming there to begin with, then our jail won't be as full as it is. I mean, if you go and look, I don't have the exact stats, and I don't know, I'm sure Sheriff Rossler has them a lot better than I, but look at the people that are in that jail due to substance abuse or that have a substance abuse problem. And I'm sure plenty of them are in there for that simple reason. They got picked up for retail fraud, or they got picked up for stealing, or they got caught with a crack pipe and a crack rock on them or something like that. And those type of people are the ones that are sitting in there. And the problem we're having right now isn't the sentences when people get sentenced, it's the pretrial release. Because we have so many people in the jail that are waiting for their court dates and their hearing dates or their trial dates that can't post the bond, that most of those people sitting in there are just waiting to get to their court dates.
Well, I realize as a prosecuting attorney you don't set bonds. It's essentially the 4 district judges that do that. But couldn't there be something in place to where the prosecutor's office would not object to a lowered bond for there's different criteria that have to be taken into effect when the judge posts bond, but if the person isn't a flight risk, if it's not a serious felony crime where there's a violent crime, say like attempted murder, couldn't there be some kind of a policy between the prosecutors of the prosecutor's office could institute a policy saying, look, Judge, we're not going to object if you go ahead and if you lower bonds to let people out?
The judge is the one who sets the bond. It doesn't matter whether we object to it or agree to it. We can make arguments for it. But the judges set bonds that they believe are reasonable at that point in time, looking at everything you just mentioned. And I think the district court judges have a pretty good grasp on who people are and what they can see and what their records are to make a determination of whether they should be sitting in the jail or whether they should be out. Us standing up and saying, well, we think you should lower this bond or lower that bond, the judges make good decisions on their bonds on their own.
Well, doesn't that contribute to jail overcrowding though, when they're aware that there's only so many beds and the bonds are put up to where people are stuck in jail because they can't afford to post it?
I think if you went through and watched the amount of, they do arraignments, I think, I don't know for sure, but I knew they do arraignments at 9:45, 1:30, and then like 3. Or it's like 9:45, 11:30, and then something. There's 3 times during the day that they do arraignments. Not every one of those people is going into the jail. And I think that if you look at the portion of people that are actually out on bond compared to the amount of people that are in jail, that are in the criminal system right now, you would find that there are more people out on bond than are actually sitting in the jail for criminal cases that are in there.
Alternative sentencing, tethers, there's alcohol sensors you can put on somebody.
Scram unit.
We didn't have these 15, 20 years ago, and now we have them. Are they used adequately in Muskegon County, or could the use of those be increased?
I really don't know. I mean, I know that we use tethers. I have a client now who's on tether as part of the sentence, but I think that needs to be looked at. But the problem is it runs into everybody else's money. I mean, we can say, hey, yeah, well, let's put the tether on them and send them out. Hey, let's put a scram unit and send them out. But who's paying for it? And most of the time, it's the defendants that have to bear the cost for that. If you want to have a tether, you have to have a phone line. You can't have a cell phone. So now you're paying for the phone line, and then you have to pay for the tether that comes in, and then the county has to pay for the monitoring that goes along with those tethers. So that's what it basically boils down to, is the money. And if the defendants can't afford to pay for it, and the judge is allowing them to have it, then they're going to have to sit because they can't afford, because the judge isn't just going to let them out and say, okay, well, hopefully you get a tether. It needs to be in place and ready to go before you get out. Yeah.
You've been a prosecutor now for approximately 10 years. What type of job satisfaction, tell me some of your best cases where when you were done with them that you really felt a high level of job satisfaction?
It's not cases, actually. I mean, it's great when you go to trial and you win a trial, but it's really more of the after stories that you see of what happens. Like when I was a community prosecutor, my big thing was myself and Dan Churchill was that people were complaining that the prostitutes were walking up and down the street. So we went up and had a talk with the prostitutes and said, look, we'll help, and if you want, we'll take you, we'll help you get services. You need to get off the streets. If you don't, well, then we're going to start coming back, and I hate to start charging people with stuff, but you've got to clean up, and we're willing to help you. If you're willing to make the change, we'll make the change. One of my first experiences with that was, and the MLive did a story on it, was an individual by the name of Rachel Torrey, who was a prostitute out on the street. And she kept working and kept doing her thing. And finally, we got her to the point where I told the judge, hey, send her to boot camp. And she went to boot camp, learned some stuff, learned how to take care of herself, and came out and cleaned herself up. And last I knew, she's off of parole and living in a house and living a successful life. Or seeing the domestic violence victims who finally have gotten away from their abuser. Down working bike time this weekend, and I saw 2 or 3 victims that, how's it going? I left them, we're getting divorced, they look better, they feel better. I mean, those are the satisfying stories to me. Yeah, it's great to go, yes, I won a trial and I put away a guilty person. But to see that you're actually having an effect on your community, even on that small level. And there's one case that sticks out where a girl was being molested by her grandfather. And the entire family was saying that, she's making it up, this whole thing, but then to actually get the proof and get him convicted And to see the relief on her shoulders and the relief on her face after it was all said and done, that makes it worth it. But it's the small things of seeing in the community, of actually seeing forward progress instead of just driving around the same time. I'm not after the big bang or the big, makes me look good, makes me feel better. I'm more about the small, subtle things that show progress.
You're elected prosecutor, and there's things called cold cases, to where they're sitting there, they're sitting there, they're sitting there. Some of them are major cases. We've still got some unsolved homicides in Muskegon County. What's going to be your priority with that?
Well, we tried to form a cold case team here when I first started in 2002, and I know they looked into some things and did whatever, but when I was in the office, it wouldn't be unusual for us to pick up a file and look at it and read it, and just because sometimes just time passing a little bit will look. And if you see something, just call up the officer or the detective if they're still around and say, hey, what do you think of that? And bat it around. But I think that there are some cases that need to be looked at from an outside eye of what's there. I mean, because once you look at something so many times, you're eventually going to miss something that might be a glaring opportunity. And that's why I think it's important. I mean, the prosecutor's office hasn't taken those cases and put them in a file and closed the door. That office still looks at them, pulls them out, takes a look, has other people look at them. I mean, I looked at cases that I had nothing to do with that happened way before I got here. And you see stuff and you work it until you get to the end. It's not until that piece comes out that you think is going to make somebody talk or is going to do something that you then would pull the team together and tell them to go take a look at it and go after it. But watching opportunities too, you get tips and people from CICE said, hey, I can tell you about this, or I can tell you about that has to do with that. None of those get ignored. They just need to be looked into and seen whether or not they can help with the case. But yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that they do there, and which I would probably expand a little bit more, is that all the cold cases would be sitting in my office for me to look at and take a look at and then have anybody else look at. I mean, there are assistant prosecutors there that have been working in the office for 2 or 4 years. They probably haven't ever seen one of those, and just say, take a look at it, because it's going to bring a fresh look. And if there's something there, well, let's get somebody on it and start working on it. But those aren't things that are going away. That's not fair to the victim's family or the community just to go, well, it's been 10 years, we're done. I mean, those people are out there somewhere.
Do you think that more priority should be spent on crimes like that, rather than, say, if somebody is caught with possession of marijuana or a suspended license or something where it's almost not a crime, but statutorily it's a crime, and therefore you're constitutionally charged with what you need to do with it? But
it's not a crime your opinion. The legislature said it's a crime.
Oh, I'm saying
right.
It's a crime. I'm not saying it's
but
not.
It's not the prosecutor's job to determine what is and what isn't a crime.
Right, exactly.
I mean, it's not my job to make law. It's not anybody's job except the legislature's to make law.
Right.
Well, and judges who think they should. But do I think our focus is in the wrong spot right now? I do. I think our focus is too worried about the low-hanging fruit that's out there on the street that's easy to pick up. I think that we've gotten away from paying attention to the drug dealers that are bringing the drugs into town. WEMAT's doing the best they can. They're a great group of guys. They do what they can with what they have. But if we're so worried about the kid who gets pulled over that has, a bottle cap full of marijuana, then okay. I mean, we're going to prosecute it or broke the law and did whatever, but I would like to get the guy who brought the bale of marijuana that kid bought off of. I mean, that's who we need to get to and get after. Yeah, they broke the law. Yes, they need to pay, but there are programs for them that allows them to get that off their record. I mean, there's 7411 status, where if you haven't had any other prior drug convictions, and you get that. There's programs to deal with those people, and they're out there. But I think that we need to move our focus a little bit more in the prosecutor's office towards going after the people that are bringing in the narcotics and the drugs and the weapons than worrying about Johnny who's driving home from school and he's going to have to suffer the consequences. But do I need to be so tough on him that he's never going to recover from it? No.
Okay. Most of the questions you've already answered, so I don't have to bother to repeat them. But some of them I still have is, what is your opinion on housing prisoners from either the state or the federal government?
In the jail?
Yes.
think you and I have actually
We
talked
have,
about
but
this.
again,
From my understanding is the federal government pays $100 a day whether they're using that bed or not. Newaygo County was able to build themselves a little bit of an expansion on their jail and use that money and purposefully built beds for federal prisoners. We're more suited for that. We're on the end of 96. They don't have to drive up a 2-lane road. We have an airport close to where we're at. If they need somebody, they need to fly in or fly out. But I think to say we don't want federal prisoners here because they're a risk, but we don't want to look at the money. I mean, if there's an opportunity to make some money, then let's make some money and help pay for the jail's operating costs. But there isn't a federal prison there's one temporary holding facility in Detroit. Otherwise, all of these guys they're not prisoners. They're pretrial detention, pre-sentence detention people. They're not serving their term out in our county jail where they've been sentenced to 36 months in federal prison. Those people leave the state and go to another prison. These are pretrial detention type people.
okay. How about prisoners or inmates from the state?
In our jails?
Yeah.
No. I mean, if they're going to be, I guess it depends what level you're talking about, because there are different levels. You have the DOC ones that are on parole, that commit a crime, that have current state charges, county charges, which holds them here in our jail when DOC may have taken them back to prison. And then you have the prisoners who have been sentenced to prison that are still sitting in our jails.
Now, Sheriff Rossler has on a number of occasions have said that the jail can make money by housing state prisoners here in the county. So I don't think it was those awaiting trial that he was talking about.
It'd be nice if you could house those prisoners and the state would pay their bill.
Okay.
But we don't have the room.
Yeah.
What is the ideal number for the jail? Is it 400? Is it 250?
I think the ideal number, the current jail or a jail that I would like to see.
Well, let's say, okay, the current jail is 400.
Well, the current jail is about, I think, 325, and they're running about 45 to 50% over most of the time. When they get to the 400 number, they're over their number they're allowed to supposed to.
But let's say that we have a situation where it's like, we have a jail, and let's say whether the existing jail is remodeled, if we have a brand new building, what's the number that would work based on your experience?
That's kind of a loaded question, and I'll tell you why. Because if you put the drug courts into place, you create a rehabilitation in that jail that allows people to get the services that they need, then your jail space is right where it needs to be at. If you're going to continue with the current policies of arresting, repeating, and committing and making people offenders, well, you better build a really big jail, because you're going to have lots of people coming in. Because there's no services, there's nothing to correct their problems or their behaviors or help address their issues for why they're coming to the jail to begin with. If you help address those problems, let's just get down to it. The problem I have is we have so many people in there doing pretrial release that if somebody gets sentenced to the county jail, you could say 12 months in the county jail. And if the judge has to get somebody out and they're a nonviolent offender and they're not a person who committed a CSC, we're lucky if they do, 6 months of their sentence. And then they're out at a halfway house. I would rather see people serving their sentences for what they did than thinking, oh, well, I'm going to be out in 30 days because of overcrowding. I mean, that's what needs to happen. We need to have a capacity that will allow people to have, the services, allow people to serve their sentences, and then at the same time have the pretrial detention. I think you can do that, but it's not going to happen overnight, especially if you adopt pretrial services or services like sobriety court and the drug courts and alternative sentencing will help lower the population. But if you do commit a crime and you're going to, or a probation violation when you're going to serve your sentence, 60 days means 60 days. It doesn't mean 30 and then you go to KPEP.
So essentially, if this whole criminal justice system in Muskegon County was managed better and somebody stepped back from the forest and could really see all the trees, you could put a program together to where you wouldn't need many more beds than we have right now, and it would function like it's supposed to function.
It's not going to take one person. It's going to take a lot of people to do it, because you have to have the courts, you have to have probation, you have to have the community, you have to have everybody willing to do that. And I'm not saying that it's going to happen overnight, that it's like, boom, here it goes, it's going to take care of it, but it's something you can move towards. You know, the jail, the issue with the jail is best handled by the sheriff's department and what can be done. But what are the question is what can the criminal justice system do to help alleviate that problem in the jail? Do I think the criminal justice system in Muskegon County is being mismanaged? No. I think they're doing what they can with what they have. You have to manage what you have. You can't manage what you don't have.
Well, whose fault is that they don't have what they need?
Wouldn't be able to tell you.
What would be your elected prosecutor, and the race is over August, whoever wins, that's
Well, unless somebody writes in.
unless somebody writes in, but pretty much that rarely happens. So pretty much whoever wins the August primary wins the race. What would be some of the first things you would do in office that are different than what's been done there for the last 10, 20, 30 years?
2030, I don't know about. The last 24, almost a quarter century, I do know something, but I don't know about the beginning of it because I wasn't here. But for the past 10 years, like I said, is that we need to get more involved in the community. Our people need to come out. That's, you know, my 3-point plan is that, you know, that's what the first 3 things I want to do is that we're going to come out of the office. We're going to come out into the community. We're going to get to know the community because to know who we represent gives us a better opportunity to represent them in court. The other is that we're going to be fair. It's gotten to the point sometimes where we charge people because we're looking for media attention or we're charging them because we're trying to hammer them as hard as we can. And that's not the point. Let's actually take a look at the person that's coming through. I mean, if they're a violent offender or they're molesting children or they're taking advantage of the elderly, I have no mercy for you. But if you're willing to stand up and say you made a mistake, well, then let's listen to what they have to do and let's let you prove yourself. And if you're willing to do that, then good. If you're not, but you tell me you were, well, then we're going to have to address some issues on the other end. But I'm going to give everybody a chance to begin with. The other is listening. We're going to sit and listen to every person that wants to come up and wants to talk or wants to have whatever. Now, we're not going to be able to do it 24/7, and we won't be able to meet with everybody whenever. But you know, the one thing that I always heard was, well, the prosecutor's office never listens. We go up and they never want to hear what our side of it is. Okay, you're going to see me out in the community. Come on down. Let's talk. Give me your side of it. Let's hear it. Now, the one thing I'll tell you is we might not agree, but we're going to agree to disagree, and we're going to go our separate directions, but at least that way you got an opportunity to express what you want to talk about. And that's, you know, that's what I think it matters. I mean, is that if you get rid of that mystique and you come out of that tower and you come down and talk to the citizens of the community, then they feel as if you're actually working for them and not just this person down there. And the other is that we need to bring a drug court to Muskegon County, without a doubt. It's time. We've been talking about it, but we haven't done it, and it's time to actually do it because it's time to start addressing our problems instead of just keeping the status quo.
Is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you feel is important you'd like to mention?
No, I think you pretty much covered everything. I mean, the issue is that where Muskegon wants to go now. Do we want to move forward, or do we want to stay in the spot we're at? Do we want to try to bring in some programs and help what we're doing and help this community? Or do we want to keep arresting, convicting, and repeating? It's easy to, at politic time, to stand up and say, well, I want to do this, and I want to do that, and I want to do that. But I think if you go through and look from the time that I announced I was going to run until now, my message has not changed. This is who I am. I speak from my heart. I'm not going to BS you. I'm not going to tell you what I think you want to hear, because that doesn't get anybody anywhere. I think that it's time that we actually start dealing with each other as community members and adults instead of going out and talking to each other how they want to hear it. The other thing is it's a funny story, is that when I was thinking about running, I went down to Grand Rapids and I asked 5 people who the prosecutor in Kent County was. Went to Grand Rapids. One person could name the prosecutor. I named 5 of them who the Muskegon County prosecutor was. All 5 of them knew who the Muskegon County prosecutor was. That needs to change. It's time for the prosecutor's office to stop leading the way and being the face of law enforcement in Muskegon County, because there are plenty of law enforcement officers that do a good job that if their chief wants to recognize them and they did the investigations, then it's on them. It's not going to be a, oh, well, these are the facts and circumstances, and we charge them with this and this and this, and then later we plead it away. It's going to, you can't be fair. A prosecutor's job is not simply to convict, but to assure that justice is being done. And that's what I pretty much lived my ability by when I was in that office, and I still do now. And I think it's time to bring that back.
All right, well, Mr. Curtis, we appreciate you taking some time out of your schedule to come talk to us today, and good luck in the primary.
Appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.